The rumor was that no maid ever lasted in that house, and at the center of that terror was the mistress, Rose. She slapped without warning, screamed without mercy, and her insults could cut deeper than a whip. In just 6 months, she had broken 9 maids. Some fled in tears, others slipped away before dawn. One even had to jump the back fence barefoot to escape. The 10th to enter was Naomi. She didn't come to please a mistress or to run away. She came for a sick daughter, armed with the only weapon she had, a heart with nothing left to lose. "Start with the marble floors. The mistress will be down shortly," the housekeeper said. At the housekeeper's words, Naomi didn't argue. She retied her headscarf and picked up the mop. Her movements were deliberate, for her purpose here was greater than any humiliation. Her daughter, Deborah, was in and out of the hospital, the bills piling up. She made a silent promise to herself. Endure. Even when they insult you, endure. Just 3 months. It's all for Debbie. She was still wiping the central rug when she heard the sound. Click, clack, click. Naomi looked up and there she was, Rose, standing at the top of the stairs in a wine-colored silk robe, holding a teacup as if she owned the world. She looked Naomi up and down, then at the mop, then at the bucket beside her, and without a single word, she kicked the bucket over. Water sloshed across the floor. Rose approached, her eyes cold. "This is the 3rd time this week someone has blocked my path. I'm not in the mood. Clean it up." Naomi said nothing. She bent down and picked up the mop. Her slippers were soaked, but she kept on cleaning. From the hallway, the housekeeper whispered, "She won't last. She looks too fragile." But what no one knew was this. Pride wasn't something Naomi had lost. It was something she was willing to sacrifice. She had bowed her head in worse houses, had gotten on her knees in hospitals to fight for her daughter's life. Naomi was not weak. The next morning, Naomi was up before 5 a.m. She swept the front yard, wiped the glass doors, and cleaned the living room again. This time with less water, no splashes, no mistakes. She wasn't here to play. By 6:30, she was in the kitchen washing dishes next to Mama Ronke, the cook. "You're up so early," Mama Ronke said in surprise. Naomi offered a small smile. "I'm just trying to do my job, Ma." "Humph. Just be careful. In this house, it's not about getting up early. It's about surviving the mistress's sharp tongue." Just then, they heard the shuffle of slippers. Rose entered the kitchen, her silk robe tied tight, her gaze as sharp as a knife. "Where is my lemon water?" Naomi lowered her head. "I'll get it right now, ma'am." Rose's eyes narrowed, her voice like ice. "Room temperature, not cold, not warm. If I take a sip and find it unpleasant, you will regret it." Naomi carefully prepared a perfect glass, carrying it to the mistress's room with steady hands. The room was magnificent, not a speck of dust in sight. Rose took a sip, then smirked. "You got lucky." But that was just the opening act. As Naomi turned to leave, she added, "There's a stain in the bathroom. I hate stains." As Naomi carefully scrubbed a faint rust spot on the sink, her shoulder accidentally brushed against an expensive bottle of perfume. The glass bottle wobbled. In a lightning-fast reflex, she caught it, her heart pounding. But it was too late. Rose was standing in the doorway. Smack! A stinging slap whipped Naomi's head to the side. Her cheek burned. "You clumsy fool," Rose hissed. "I detest clumsiness." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, but she did not cry. She simply bowed her head and whispered, "I'm sorry, ma'am." Then she gently placed the perfume bottle back in its spot, her hands trembling, but not her spirit. Naomi's silence didn't pacify Rose. On the contrary, she took it as an act of defiance. She decided she would break this girl's will, right in front of everyone else. That afternoon, in the living room, Rose intentionally let a glass of red wine slip from her hand, spilling it all over the pristine white rug. She didn't scream. She just smiled, a cold smile, and then called the other maids over to watch. In front of everyone, she looked directly at Naomi. "Come here," she said, her voice as sweet as poisoned honey. "Get on your knees. Clean it up." The air in the room froze. All eyes fell on Naomi. She took a deep breath, the image of her little girl flashing in her mind. Then, slowly, she knelt on the cold floor. As she scrubbed diligently, Rose bent down and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "This position suits you. A lowlife belongs on the ground." Tears threatened to spill, but Naomi swallowed them back. Her hand tightened on the cloth. "For Debbie. This is all for Debbie." After that day, Rose became even more cruel. She threw away Naomi's uniform, forcing her to wear her own clothes to work, only to mock her for it. She blamed Naomi for breaking things that she herself had dropped. But Naomi did not break. She didn't cry. She didn't run. Every insult, every cruel act from Rose only fueled the resolve burning inside her. She would stay. She would endure until her daughter was saved. Naomi's endurance was more than just an action. It was starting to become a force within the house. Even Mr. Femi, Rose's husband, began to feel it. One evening, he saw Naomi quietly tidying the garden, her figure thin but her back straight. Her face was etched with fatigue from the invisible lashings, but her hands still worked with precision. He called out, his voice low and hesitant, "How long are you going to endure this?" Naomi stopped, turned, and for the first time, she looked her master directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. "As long as my daughter needs me, sir, I will endure." That answer, simple and resolute, made Mr. Femi pause. That night, he said to his wife, "You're taking this too far, Rose." Rose took a sip of her wine, her eyes glinting with a triumphant fire. "Oh, am I? I don't see her breaking yet. I want to see where her limit is." But deep down, it was Rose who was starting to feel unsettled. She was used to the begging and tears of previous maids, but she didn't know what to do with this silence. Naomi's forbearance was not surrender. It was an invisible shield. Every slap, every insult, every time she was forced to her knees only made that shield stronger. And it was this unshakable fortitude that had begun to plant a vague sense of fear in the mistress's heart. She realized she was facing something that money and power could not break, and she hated it. The next day, Naomi's limit was finally reached, not by her will, but by her body. Under a scorching sun, Rose had forced her to pull every weed from the vast rose garden with her bare hands. Sweat soaked her shirt, her back ached, and her fingers were raw and bleeding. As the image of Rose standing on the balcony with a triumphant smirk began to blur, Naomi's world tilted, then faded to black. She collapsed right in the middle of the flower beds. Rose merely clicked her tongue in contempt. "Useless thing. Drag her into the shade," she ordered, then turned and went back inside without a second glance. Meanwhile, elsewhere, in a small rented room, a little girl named Deborah was waiting anxiously for her mother. It was past time for her to be home. Her calls weren't going through, and a fear was growing in her young heart. Unable to wait any longer, she broke her piggy bank, took her small savings, and caught a bus by herself to the wealthy estate to find her mother. The doorbell rang, shattering the oppressive silence of the mansion. The housekeeper opened the door and froze at the sight of a thin, pale little girl with clear, determined eyes. Rose came down the stairs, her expression annoyed at being disturbed. "Who is it? Send them away. I'm not receiving guests." But then she stopped short when she saw the child. She was about to yell, but something held her back. The little girl showed no fear of the woman's scowling face. She stepped inside, looked the powerful woman straight in the eye, and her young but clear voice rang out through the vast space. "I'm here to find my mom. Is my mom here?" Rose froze. A familiar rage surged within her. Harsh, demeaning words were ready to fly from her lips. "Who is your mother? Get out of here." But the words died in her throat, because when she looked into the child's eyes, she saw no fear. She only saw an immense worry, an unwavering resolve. This child wasn't afraid of her, because her greatest fear was that something had happened to her mother. Rose smirked, trying to reclaim her usual cruelty. Your mother? Oh, you mean the one who just fainted in the garden because she couldn't handle her work. She said it, waiting to see panic, to see tears. But she didn't get it. The girl's face paled, but her gaze only hardened. She took another step forward, her voice trembling but not weak. My mum fainted. Is she sick? Then, before Rose could answer, she spoke again, a sentence so innocent it hit with the force of 1,000 stones. Mom said she was just working hard, but maybe she's sick like me. Rose went still. Sick like you, she repeated, her voice no longer sharp, just filled with a raw curiosity. What? What sickness do you have? The little girl looked up at her, her eyes clear, without a hint of guile. Her small hand unconsciously went to her chest. The doctor said, "My heart isn't very strong." A heavy silence fell over the room, an unhealthy heart. The words didn't evoke emotion in Rose. Instead, they were like a cold, hard fact, the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Naomi's entire behavior over the past days suddenly became terrifyingly clear. The forbearance, the endurance, the exhaustion. It wasn't weakness, it was a mother's sacrifice. And she, Rose, had spent every second torturing, draining the life out of the only support this sick child had. A sharp, brutally practical question flashed through her mind. If that woman doesn't make it, what happens to this child? There was no torment, no regret, just a clear, stark realization that her actions had pushed this mother and child to the brink. For the first time, her cruelty didn't bring a sense of power, but the bitter taste of a stupid mistake with potentially irreversible consequences. She felt a prickle of annoyance, a frustration that the situation had spun out of her control. She hated this feeling. She had to fix it immediately. She spun around, her voice more decisive and forceful than ever, but the coldness had been replaced by an unfamiliar urgency. Take Naomi to the guest room. Call the doctor, now. The housekeeper and the other maids were stunned, unable to believe what they were hearing. Then Rose turned back and looked down at the little girl standing there. She bent down slightly, a gesture no one had ever seen her make. "Follow me," she said, her voice still clipped, but behind it was a changed purpose. "To your mother." In the days that Naomi was sick, Deborah's presence became an undeniable reality in the mansion. At first, Rose treated her like a responsibility, a problem to be managed. She ordered the cook to prepare nutritious meals and assigned the girl a luxurious bedroom. But she kept her distance, observing the child from afar with a confusion she refused to acknowledge. The change didn't begin with a soft word, but with a garden. One afternoon, Rose found Deborah sitting alone in the garden, quietly looking at her most prized roses. A strange impulse made her walk over. "That's a Juliet rose," she said, her tone still a bit dry. "People pay a great deal of money for it." The little girl looked up, her eyes clear. "It's so beautiful. My mum likes roses, too." Rose paused. Instead of walking away, she found herself talking about how to care for each type of flower, about the amount of sun they needed, the kind of soil they preferred. She wasn't telling stories, she was just stating facts. But to the little girl, they were the most wonderful stories. The second breakthrough came from the forgotten piano in the living room, covered in a thin layer of dust. Deborah asked timidly, "Ma'am, does this piano still make noise?" Rose hadn't touched those keys in years. They belonged to another life, another person. She was about to refuse, but the girl's hopeful eyes held her back. She lifted the cover, her stiff fingers finding the keys. The first sound was a little off-key, but then she began to play a simple melody. She taught the girl how to place her fingers on the white keys. For the first time in years, music, even just disconnected notes, rang out, chasing away the deadly silence of the mansion. Slowly, more warm moments began to appear. Not long conversations, but shared silences. Rose would read a book on the sofa while Deborah colored on the floor. Sometimes, she would read an interesting tidbit aloud, and the girl would look up and listen. The child's presence, somehow, was filling the cold, empty spaces in the house and in her heart. Then one day, Deborah shyly handed her a piece of paper. It was a drawing, a child's crayon scrawl of two figures, one large and one small, standing side by side beneath the sundae. Both were smiling, their grins wide and bright. Rose took the drawing, her hand trembling slightly. She stared at the two smiling faces. This was how the child saw her, not as a cruel mistress, but as a friend. A powerful emotion swelled in her chest, not nagging regret, but a strange sense of peace. She said nothing. She rose and walked directly to the most prominent wall in the living room. She took down the expensive abstract painting and carefully hung Deborah's drawing in its place. To the staff, that act was more than a shock. It was a declaration. The genuine warmth of a child had become the most valuable thing in this house. Deborah's drawing hung on the wall, a silent reminder. Every time she passed it, Rose saw the smile on the paper, and then thought of the unhealthy heart that kept that smile alive. She knew she had to do something. That night, instead of sleeping, she sat in her study, reading Deborah's medical report again and again. The medical jargon was dense, but one thing was perfectly clear. The cost of the surgery was a staggering figure. Rose picked up the phone. Her first call was to her husband. "Femi, get me the number for the director of St. Jude's Hospital." Her voice was as blunt as ever. The next call took place just minutes later. "Director Miller," she said. "This is Rose, Femi Richards' wife. I have a case that requires your assistance. I'm sending the medical file over now. I want a meeting with your best cardiologists tomorrow morning." In the days that followed, the mansion became busy in a different way. Rose spent most of her time in her study, constantly on the phone and sending emails. She no longer screamed about trivial matters because her mind was focused on something far bigger. She was using her connections and her negotiating skills to find a way to help. She contacted a charitable foundation she knew, presenting Deborah's case with clarity and conviction. In the midst of this, the staff noticed the change. One day, the cook accidentally broke a plate. Everyone held their breath. But Rose just looked up, glanced at the mess, and said, "Clean it up carefully. Make sure no one gets cut." The entire kitchen was stunned. This quiet was more unsettling than any of her shouting ever was. A few days later, once everything was arranged, Rose entered the room where Naomi was resting. Naomi was awake but still very weak. Seeing her mistress walk in, she flinched out of habit. Rose stood at the foot of the bed, not getting too close. No apology was offered. She just looked directly at Naomi and spoke clearly. "You need to rest." She paused for a moment, then continued, "Your daughter's surgery has been scheduled. A charitable foundation will cover the full cost. Your job now is to get well enough to be there for her." Naomi stared, unable to believe what she was hearing. She searched her mistress's face for any sign of a cruel joke, but there was none, only seriousness. And then she broke down. Tears of relief and gratitude streamed down her face. Rose just stood there in silence. For the first time, she didn't feel annoyed by someone else's tears. She just felt that things had been handled. A few months later, as the leaves in the garden began to turn, Deborah returned. She was no longer pale and frail, but an active little girl with rosy cheeks, chasing a small dog across the lawn. Her clear laughter echoed through the air, becoming the most familiar and precious sound in the house. When Naomi officially returned to the mansion, she didn't come back as a maid. Rose had sent a car to pick her up. Stepping into the house that had once been her hell, Naomi felt a storm of emotions. The first sight she saw was her daughter sitting with Rose on the garden swing, the two of them sharing a picture book. She quietly approached. Rose looked up, her gaze no longer cold or commanding, only calm. "Ma'am," Naomi began, her voice still trembling slightly, "for the rest of my life, I don't know how I can ever repay you." Rose set the book down and gestured for Deborah to go play inside. She looked Naomi in the eye, a look of directness and respect. "I don't need you to repay me, Naomi," she said slowly. "What I need is your help." Rose continued, her tone practical and clear. "This house needs a manager, someone who knows how to care for others, but is also strong enough to keep things in order. I've watched you. You command respect without having to scream. The housekeeper position is open. Would you like the job?" It wasn't a command, it was an offer, an invitation. Naomi looked at the woman before her, the one who had once tormented her, and was now giving her the greatest form of recognition. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of a new beginning. One quiet afternoon a few weeks later, when the relationship between them had grown more comfortable, Naomi found Rose standing alone in the living room, staring out at the garden. She brought her a cup of tea. "What are you thinking about, ma'am?" Naomi asked softly. Rose didn't turn around right away. She let out a long sigh, a breath heavy with years of loneliness. "I was thinking about this house," she said, her voice distant. "I married Mr. Femi when I was very young, his second wife. I always felt like I had to prove something. I thought that if I controlled everything, if I made people fear me, then no one would dare look down on me or hurt me." She turned to look at Naomi, a rare honesty in her eyes. "But all I did was build the walls higher and higher, until eventually I was the one trapped inside, alone." She paused for a moment before continuing, "Your endurance, and that child's innocence. It showed me that true strength doesn't come from control, but from caring. Thank you, Naomi, for helping me find the door out." For the first time, Naomi truly understood the pain behind the woman's cruelty. She said nothing, only nodded gently, an empathy that needed no words. From that day on, the house truly changed from the inside out. The dreadful silence was replaced by warm conversations. Naomi, in her role as housekeeper, fostered a work environment built on respect instead of fear. The story doesn't end with a loud scene. It ends on another quiet afternoon. Rose is standing in the living room, a teacup in her hand. She isn't looking out at the garden, nor is she watching TV. Her gaze is fixed on a small drawing, carefully framed and hung in the most prominent spot on the wall, Deborah's drawing of two smiling people. A gentle, genuinely peaceful smile touched her lips. She realized that all the expensive art she had ever owned was not as precious as this crayon scrawl, because it wasn't just a picture. It was proof that a hardened heart could learn to feel again. The house didn't just gain laughter, it had gained a soul,